Hello and welcome to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast. Like always, I'm your host, Jake Daly. I've got a great show for you today. Day 2 of the NFL Draft. Happy Friday. Gotta love draft weekend. It's one of my favorite weekends of the year. No doubt about it. But we're going to go over pretty much most of what happened in the draft last night. Going to talk a little bit about the Travis Hunter trade, what happened there at that second overall pick. Also going to talk a little bit about some of my favorite picks of day 1, guys that I think fit really well with the teams that drafted them. Also going to talk a little bit about why Shedeur Sanders is not a first-round quarterback, was not a first-round draft pick. Kind of surprising a little bit, and the more you read into it, it seems a little more likely. Then we're also going to talk a little bit about some of the guys that are still remaining in day 2, talk about just how they are as prospects, kind of what they are capable of. And then our last segment, we're going to finish out with a little mini mock, do the first couple picks, do up until pick 40, and kind of go with what I think might happen there. Though I was pretty wrong yesterday. I did get a couple right, but some of them were way off yesterday, I will say. Before I get into any of all that, though, I just want to quickly remind everyone that we love hearing from you during our show. Whether it's a quick comment, thoughtful question, an opinion, any kind of insight that you have to share, you want to let us know, we'd love to hear all of it. If you want to do that, an easy way is to use the Super Chat feature. Just go and click the $sign at the bottom of the chat box. Just send in your comment, question, opinion, whatever hot take you got. You can send it in there. This guarantees that you get on the air. Your comment will get read on the show. And it's also just a great way to support GSMC. Keep supporting what we're trying to build here. We are so grateful to have you all as part of our community here at GSMC. We couldn't do what we do without you. To start off, I want to talk a little bit about Travis Hunter and kind of what happened there. So this was a rumor that kind of got started. I really heard it yesterday, really coming to the forefront, but kind of got started a couple days ago of Jacksonville potentially trying to trade up for Travis Hunter. It sounded like they were really in love with him as a prospect, thought he was the best guy in this class by far, thought he was kind of a generational talent that they really wanted, they really needed. And I think this was a good move for both sides. And here's the details, the breakdown. So Jacksonville, obviously, they got the number 2 overall pick, which they use on Travis Hunter. They also got a 4th rounder for this year, 104th overall, and the 200th overall pick in the 6th round. On the flip side, though, Cleveland, for only dropping down 3 spots, dropped to 5, got Mason Graham there. Then they also picked up number 36 overall in the 2nd round, as well as they got Jacksonville's 4th rounder at 126. So they dropped down 20 spots in the 4th round. And then the big one, they pick up Jacksonville's 2026 first round draft pick. And reportedly this trade had been agreed upon on April 7th. So almost 3 weeks ago now, this trade was already agreed upon. There were 2 conditions. One, that the Titans would take Cam Ward at number 1 overall. And 2, both owners needed to sign off on the trade for this to happen. I'm more surprised that Jimmy Haslam signed off on it from the Cleveland perspective. Kind of surprised Andrew Berry talked him into that trade. But Shad Khan, that makes a lot of sense. Jacksonville, first-year GM, James Gladstone, guy that kind of wanted to make a splash. Anthony, how are we doing today? I have a gut feeling for my Dolphins that if we draft a corner because of the fact that he's pro-ready, needs less development, he could start day 1, draft-oriented strong. I could see that. Obviously, I think there's still a pretty good amount of cornerbacks available that are pretty high-caliber talents. Could pull a Jalen Ramsey. I could see that. I think it also depends just I think a lot of it depends on the play of Trevor Lawrence. Will Liam Cohen help him as a first-year head coach? Obviously, play caller for the Bucs, offensive-minded guy. I think a lot of it's kind of going to depend on what happens with Trevor Lawrence, because if they still struggle and, they're a 5-6 win team the next 2 or 3 years, I could see something like that where he does maybe try to force his way out. We'll see, though. I don't know. I think in the short term, though, I know he's obviously a Florida guy. He's going to go back home. I would rather play in Florida than in Cleveland, and I'm from Cleveland, so that says something, I think. But this is a guy that he's going to immediately help the Jaguars. Sounds like he's going to play primarily wide receiver, and they're going to focus on that side of the ball with him. Pair him up with their first-rounder last year, Brian Thomas Jr. from LSU, who had a breakout rookie season. Really great year. I was not expecting that from Brian Thomas, not going to lie. He was not one of my guys last year, but showed me wrong, had a great season. Travis Hunter next to Brian Thomas, that's a much better wide receiver room than they've had in the past few years. And then also, if he does, they're obviously going to play him at cornerback at some point, package him on the other side of the ball, have him start opposite of Tyson Campbell. I don't know how much he's going to play on defense. I think they're probably going to try to ease him in a little bit. But from the Cleveland point of view, I know a lot of Cleveland fans were not happy about this on Twitter last night. And I can understand why. It is painful to see a guy like Travis Hunter, who the Browns' own general manager, Andrew Berry, described as a unicorn earlier this week. It's hard to see a guy like that, your team, pass him up. But this is a move that I think really helps the Browns in the long term. This Browns team is a 2-draft fix for sure. I think at minimum, they just can't fix all the holes on this roster in one draft class in one offseason. I'm more surprised that Andrew Berry kind of convinced Jimmy Haslam that, hey, this is the way to go. We need 2 years on this team to kind of reset. This is an aging roster. It's an expensive roster. And also, it's one that hasn't had a first-round pick in the past 3 seasons. So you're missing a lot of premium talent just across the board. I think also getting Mason Graham is really big for Cleveland. Defensive tackle, that front, both sides of the line for the Browns have needed help. The Browns do have 4 returning offensive linemen. DeJuan Jones, I guess, is a 5th you can count. They're going to pencil him at left tackle this year. But O-line needs depth. D-line really needs depth. D-tackle was not a position of strength. It was a weakness for the Browns. They really only had Mike Hall Jr., who had a pretty solid season last year, second rounder out of Ohio State. But he's probably going to be more of a pass rush guy, pass rush specialist maybe. Shelby Harris is still on the roster, but he's 33, 34, could potentially be cut this offseason. And they did bring in Malik Collins, who is right now penciled to start, but getting Mason Graham really adds to that room. And it's also a big position of need. It's going to be a guy that fills that hole for the Browns. And at the absolute minimum, I think Mason Graham gives the Browns a guy with a solid floor and a really high motor at a position that's becoming increasingly more important in the NFL. But I also think just the picking up the first rounder next year from Jacksonville, because I'm not a huge believer in the Jaguars. Obviously, they kind of had a slide last season, just towards the end of the year, pretty much mailed it in. So that's part of the reason they only had 4 wins. But I think this Jacksonville team, I don't think they're as close as everybody says. They do play in a really weak division. That's one big bonus for the Jaguars, is that the AFC South is not a big fan of the AFC South. I think really the Colts are the only team that, or not the Colts, the Texans are the only team that is a legitimate playoff contender. And the quarterback play, the level of quarterback play in the division, Trevor Lawrence is the guy, that second quarterback in that division. He's really the only that guy that can potentially match what CJ Stroud can do. So there is definitely room for Jacksonville to potentially go on a run, especially if they have a winning record in the division, which shouldn't be too hard to accomplish. I think potentially Jacksonville could make a run, but I'm not a big believer in them personally. I think what we saw last season is probably going to be more of what we're going to see in the coming years. I think we're going to see a little marginal improvement, but I still see them as a 6 or 7 win team this season. And with that, this pick could potentially be a top 15, top 10 even selection. So the Browns next year would have theoretically, potentially 2 top 10 picks in the first round. And I think this is a sign that they're going for next year's quarterback class. I think, especially when you saw the Giants trade up yesterday to get a quarterback, I had mentioned that the Browns could potentially do that move that we ended up seeing the Giants do. But I think that kind of shows that Andrew Berry, that front office, they are not trying to get a quarterback in this year's class, not big believers in them. Maybe get a prospect today or a prospect tomorrow as a developmental guy. You know, I know they really like Jalen Milroe, his ability as a runner. He's a guy that's got high character, high work ethic, really a leader just overall, and a guy that really seems to be able and willing to learn the quarterback position. Do they take a chance on a guy like that? I think that could be an option, but I really think this shows they are keying towards that 2026 quarterback class when potentially Arch Manning, Garrett Nussmeier, Lenoris Sellers, Drew Aller, Cade Klubnik, all could be draft eligible. That class, in terms of depth, in terms of potential star power, I think vastly outweighs this year's quarterback draft class. And I think that's why we saw this move from Cleveland yesterday. This is Andrew Berry saying, hey, we know this is not a fixable team this year. We have holes across the board. We need more draft picks. We need to restock the war chest. And we want a quarterback next year. They're going to be another year removed from Deshaun Watson at that point, and the cap hit will lessen. They can move on in the quarterback position, and I think that's kind of what this is showing. But I think Jacksonville, I'm really curious to see how Travis Hunter will perform. I'm curious to see what kind of play designs, what schemes Liam Cohen will draw up for Travis Hunter. How is he going to get him touches? How is he going to get him involved in the game plan? I think that's going to be really curious to see. I'm excited, though. I think Travis Hunter is going to be really awesome to watch in the NFL. I think he's going to be a really great player. So it sucks from the Cleveland point of view of, you know, you're missing out on a guy that could very well be the best player in this class, a Heisman Trophy winner. But, you know, you're looking forward to that 2026 season, next year's draft. I think that's kind of what this move is showing us from both sides of the aisle. So we're going to take our first break of the show right now. When we come back, I'm going to talk a little more draft, and we're going to talk about some of the guys that I really liked this year, and where they ended up in the first round, their fits. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, but we will be back on the GSMC College Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, getting in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC College Football Podcast, presented to you by the GSMC Podcast Network on this beautiful Friday, April 25th. Happy Draft Day 2. We got even more draft talk. But before we get into any of that, I just want to remind everyone that this show is all about all y'all. All y'all, it just came out. Wow. But we love hearing from you during the show. Any opinion, comment, insight, hot take, whatever you got, we would love to hear it. One easy way to ensure that your comment gets on the air is to use the super chat feature. To do that, go and click the $ in the bottom of the chat box, type in your comment, question, opinion, whatever there, and send that in, and it'll pop up on my screen. I'll be able to read your comments, and it's just a great way to support our show as well. We couldn't do what we do at GSMC without all of your support. We're so grateful to have all of you as a part of our community here at GSMC, and just so that we can keep bringing you the sports content and just content overall that you love. I want to talk a little bit about some of my favorite picks from day one. Not necessarily guys that, everybody said was a great pick, but just ones that I kind of really liked. My first one that I saw that I was like, ooh, that's going to be a really good pick. I'm kind of wondering how I want to do this. I think I'm going to go in terms of draft order. So the first pick of the evening that I saw that I really loved, really keyed in on, was Tyler Warren to the Indianapolis Colts at the number 14 overall selection. First of all, I was pretty shocked when Colston Loveland went before Tyler Warren at number 10 overall to the Chicago Bears. I really thought if Tyler Warren was there at 10, Ben Johnson would jump on him. Just how he can be used. Johnson is a really creative play caller, can line Tyler Warren up in a number of different formations, but that's not what happened. They went with a different tight end. They went with Colston Loveland, who is a great prospect in his own right, was a consensus number 1 tight end coming into this year before Tyler Warren rewrote history books. But I think I'm a Tyler Warren fan, and this is a guy that when you look at what he did in college, finished his Penn State career as program leader in total touchdowns, in receptions, in receiving yards, and in receiving touchdowns among all tight ends ever. And they've had a couple good ones, especially when you think about like Mike Gesicki went there and had a really great career. Tyler Warren outpaced all of them in basically every statistical category that he could, that they're eligible for. But this is a guy that's super versatile. Like I said, he can line up anywhere. He can line up outside as a perimeter wideout. He can line up in the slot. He can line up in line as a true traditional tight end. He can line up in the backfield. He's even taken snaps at quarterback. This is a dude that literally can play pretty much anywhere. In that kind of sense, he's kind of similar to like Taysom Hill. But think Taysom Hill, but a lot more talented and a lot more upside. Not taking anything away from Taysom Hill. That's my guy. But Tyler Warren can do all that at an elite level all the time. This is a guy, especially, I think one of the underrated characteristics of him is his ability after the catch. Powerful, instinctive runner, able to break the first tackle super easily, a lot quicker and more agile than people kind of expect, and it shows up when you watch him on tape. You see cornerbacks, safeties kind of misjudging his speed and quickness all the time. And for Indy, this was a team that was really tied to Tyler Warren throughout the draft process, for a really good reason. Their tight end room is severely lacking. They had the fewest receptions by a tight end group in 2024. Now Shane Steichen can slot Tyler Warren in there, give him a guy that can produce from a number of different positions, and he can kind of be that middle of the field target that Indy really, really needs right now. Help out Anthony Richardson if he's still potentially the answer at quarterback for the Colts. I don't know, I have questions about that, but this is a guy that will help his overall development, just gives Indy a more dynamic passing option. I really love Tyler Warren to the Colts. I think that's a move that makes a lot of sense. The next pick that I was like, during the draft watching live, interesting because I thought he got drafted a little higher than I would have taken him, but I really like the pick. Emeka Egbuka to the Bucks at 19, I thought was really interesting. And Tampa Bay throughout the draft process, it was defense, safety. Mox had them taking safeties, corners, pretty much anywhere on the defensive side of the ball. Linebacker, D-end. Nowhere said wide out, but if you look at it, I think it makes sense. So in the short term, you pair him with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, you give them a really solid trio, and you still have Jalen McMillan, who had a lot of flashes last season. So you have those guys, you really make that room a strength for the Bucks. But in the long term, this is also a really good move. Think about Mike Evans, he's getting up there into his 30s, kind of going to start to slow down in the next couple years, still producing at a great level. Also, Chris Godwin, he's entering his age 30 season. He's also, though, a guy that comes with injury concerns, has a lengthy injury history, missed 10 games last year. So you give them an option to replace those guys in the long term with Jalen McMillan. There's still two wide receivers that can kind of form the nucleus of that offense for the Bucks. I really like it. I think you pair Emeka Egbuka in the slot. Even though Chris Godwin, he's a really great slot receiver, he can kind of line up outside. I also think Emeka Egbuka can as well, but he's definitely much more of, I guess, a true slot wide receiver in terms of how he kind of plays. But even though he might have gone a little higher than I would have thought, or most people would have thought, I think it makes a lot of sense for the Bucks once you kind of dive into it. And I like it. Just short-term and long-term planning is always a good thing. And when you can get it in one pick, that's even better. Another guy that I thought I really liked the draft selection was Marion Hampton to the Los Angeles Chargers at number 22 overall. And I'm sure Jim Harbaugh had the biggest smile on his face when this guy's draft card went in. Harbaugh traditionally loves that running game. He likes a powerful, physical offense. That's just kind of how he wants his teams to be. That's how he builds them. And that's when he's had the most success. Last year, running game was a little lacking for the Chargers, but you put in Marion Hampton. This is a big, bruising, powerful running back, pretty much in the mold of like the ideal back size, kind of characteristics of what Jim Harbaugh is looking for. That's Marion Hampton. This is a guy that he's going to take the pressure off Justin Herbert a little bit, give them more in that running game, and also is a true three-down running back, not taking away from his ability in the pass game as a blocker, as a receiver. I think this is a guy that he immediately raises both the floor and the ceiling of the Chargers offense, of what they can do, makes them a little more multifaceted, just in terms of their approach. Obviously, they did sign Najee Harris this offseason, but Marion Hampton is a really great prospect, and I think he's a guy that is probably going to take over as the lead running back pretty soon into the season. I don't know if he starts that way. They might kind of go more of a carry split between him and Najee Harris, at least to start, but I think Marion Hampton eventually takes over, gives them a true bell cow running back for Jim Harbaugh to lean on. And I think that's something that could propel the Chargers to a little more success this upcoming season. Then the other two picks that I really loved were the last two ones that were made. the Philadelphia Eagles, they did it again. They waited, they sat, they did trade up from 32 to 31, gave up a fifth rounder, but they waited, sat, and still probably got a top 15 prospect in this year's draft class in Jihad Campbell. This is something it seems like Philly does every single year, but again, this is why they're a perennial playoff contender right now, and this is why they won the Super Bowl. Because of their drafting, because of how Howie Roseman kind of works the board. But this is a guy that can do a lot of different things for the Eagles defense. Speedy linebacker, could excel in a role that was similar to, how Zach Bond was last season. Obviously, they did re-sign Zach Bond, but you add Jihad Campbell to that room. He can play stack linebacker. He can play off the edge. He's a good spy in the run game. Got to work on his coverage skills a little bit, but his ultimate role is probably just going to depend more on his physical development. But just the value of this pick, the fit, I think this is a guy that makes a lot of sense for the Eagles, and a guy that's just going to continue to be another reason of why Philly is still one of the better franchises in the NFL right now, and in a better spot than a vast majority of the league. Then the last guy, Josh Simmons at 32 to the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm sure Patrick Mahomes was saying, "Thank you, Lord. I finally have a left tackle that hopefully can protect me." And this was a guy that the Chiefs wanted. They had been targeting. They had said, a source from the Chiefs had said that Josh Simmons was their dream target. They never really expected him to be available when the Chiefs came on the board, but he was still there. Kansas City was able to pick him up. This is a legitimate offensive tackle prospect that can be a left tackle starter. I don't know if he's ready right away. He is recovering from a torn patella tendon, happened in October. If that didn't happen, I think he's a top 10, top 15 pick in this class easily, but because of that, slid down a little bit in some teams' boards, and the Chiefs are really happy that this guy was still around. They had a dire need at tackle. That's been a rotating door for them the past few years. Kind of tried a couple different things. At one point, they even bumped Joe Thuney out to left tackle. They signed Jalen Moore from the Niners this offseason, gave him $15 million a year, but this is a guy that was a rotational player for San Francisco, so they still needed to add to the tackle spot, and Josh Simmons gives them a guy that could be a really high-caliber offensive tackle pretty soon in the near future. I don't think he's that far away. I think the one thing is just coming back from the injury, how they're going to kind of work him in and get him reps. That's going to be the one big thing there. But I think that's a guy that can be the left tackle there for many years to come if everything kind of goes well. So we're going to take another quick break on the show. When we come back, you guessed it, we got more draft talk. We're going to talk a little bit about Shedeur and what's going on there. But we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back on the GSMC College Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to the GSMC College Football Podcast. On this Friday, draft weekend, day 2, had a big day 1. We're going to talk about one of the more shocking, to some people, things that happened last night. Shedeur Sanders, not a first-round pick. He's still on the board. When day 2 is coming around today, there were a couple different times when it seemed like he could potentially be taken. The Browns obviously traded down from 2, and then they had the 5th pick. That was a potential spot. They passed on him. The Saints at 9, again, a team that has a quarterback need. They passed on him, went with Calvin Banks. Then you got to 21, the Steelers, who have been really just around the quarterback prospects, in talks with them. They pass. They take Derek Harmon from Oregon. And then the Giants at 25, they trade up, but they take Jackson Dart instead of Shedeur Sanders. One thing that I thought was interesting, I read today, The Athletic, so after the Steelers picked Derek Harmon, The Athletic surveyed 10 coaches, high-ranking NFL executives across the league to see if they were surprised that Shedeur Sanders was still available. All 10 of them said no. And a handful of these guys have all been in the quarterback market this offseason. They've all done plenty of work on Sanders themselves throughout the whole draft process. They all said no. They all said, we're not super surprised that Shedeur Sanders fell. And if you look at this from strictly relating to the draft, this really isn't that surprising. The league clearly did not view Shedeur Sanders as an elite prospect, and they haven't for a good time, I think. His arm strength and his accuracy have been kind of described as good, but not great. His shorter throws kind of flutter a little bit, especially at his pro day. And then this guy that he's a little creative, but there's not that dynamic element that, a lot of top quarterback prospects have. Then there's also questions about his ability to lead a locker room, to be a leader, questions about his dedication to the game, just a lot of different questions. There was, throughout this whole process, a bunch of guys, sources that said they wouldn't rank him over any of the 6 first-round quarterbacks that were taken last year. One particular source said that Sanders would get a 3rd-round grade in a year with, better quarterback prospects. And this guy that I think that makes a lot of sense when you look at just the depth of this quarterback class. He would not have been a first-round prospect last season. Cam Ward wasn't a first-round prospect last season. That's why he went to Miami. This is something that's kind of been in the works, I think, especially when you look at the combine, what happened there. He really rubbed people the wrong way during the combine. He just had a couple quotes in his interviews that teams did not like his answers. He said at one point, like, if you're not trying to pick me, don't pick me. If you don't want to change your franchise, your culture, don't pick me. History repeats itself over and over. So I have no worries. I should be able to do it. There's no question about it, kind of thing. He said something about where he's like, me and my dad went from Jackson State to Colorado, changed 2 programs back to back. Why can't I do that at an NFL franchise? Which I guess they're all fair points. To Shedeur's point, those are all valid reasons, I think. But this is also, just a super unique situation. We've never seen a prospect with a dad like Deion Sanders. You have a dad that's a Hall of Fame cornerback, one of the best to ever play that position, and also a guy that's just everywhere in terms of media, personality-wise. Deion is his own thing. That's prime time, and when you grow up the son of somebody like that, it's going to be interesting. I think his perspective, his kind of approach to the NFL is much different than any other quarterback that really we've ever seen, but especially in this year's class. I think just his confidence exudes. You can clearly tell that this is a confident kid, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it can rub some people the wrong way, I think. And I think him entering the league with the level of stardom that he has, it definitely gave some people discomfort, probably questions about whether that go to his head. I don't really think that's an issue, but from an NFL scout perspective, I think that's probably something that was considered at one point. But this is one of the most difficult quarterback case studies prospects to pretty much ever look at, I think. It's going to be interesting to see, does he actually succeed at the NFL level? There were, again, the combine, though, that was a really big turnoff for a lot of franchises. Teams said he was brash, arrogant, kind of hit the wrong notes. And then there was also an interview in February with ESPN where Kevin Clark asked him who he watches on tape, like which quarterbacks do you follow, who do you kind of look up to, who do you try to style your game after? And Shedeur Sanders responded saying, I watch my own tape. And then he had a comment adding to that saying it would be disrespectful to his dad, who he called him the best player to ever play the game. He kind of said it would be disrespectful to his dad if he ever looked up to anyone else in that way, which I guess you could kind of see, but at the same point, you're a quarterback. Your dad played on the other side of the ball. Yes, obviously your dad was one of the greatest to ever do it, but, you don't play the same position. You probably should be watching some kind of tape, some kind of film on some other quarterbacks. I get that not everybody does that. Not every prospect does that. But, when you're a potential first-round guy, I think that's something that teams are going to look for is, that could tell, are you doing film study? Is this somebody that's really dedicated to the NFL? I think that was kind of a question mark too. Shedeur Sanders has his own film production crew, a lot of NIL deals, social media presence. He's already been really successful just in terms of what he's done with his brand. And I think that's kind of something that could be a question mark for particular front offices is, okay, this guy's focused on his music, his production crew, his NIL deals. Is he really focused on trying to be the best quarterback, best leader, best guy for our franchise that he can be? And when you have those question marks, if you're going to use a first-round pick on a quarterback, you want those to be answered. You don't want to have as many question marks as Shedeur Sanders has. And then I also just think from a talent perspective, you look at it, this is a guy that there's nothing elite, I guess, about Shedeur Sanders in terms of trait-wise. And, when you're going to be a first-round guy, you got to have something like that, I think. All of these things kind of added up, I believe, to just what we saw last night, where Shedeur Sanders is still on the board coming into day 2. I don't think it was a scenario that a lot of people maybe outside of the league thought would happen, but it's something we're here at now, and we're going to see what happens. I think this is kind of actually similar a little bit to Will Levis. Obviously not in terms of just the media presence, everything, the stardom, that's not comparable. But if you look at where Will Levis was kind of projected before leading up to the draft, and then obviously he ended up in the second round, he had a slide, and kind of similar where it really seemed like the league did not view Will Levis as a first-round quarterback, yet outsiders, experts, quote-unquote, they all did view Will Levis as a first-round quarterback. I think that's kind of similar just in terms of that. This is comparable in how Shedeur has kind of fallen down the board. Looking, though, at day 2, it's going to be interesting. Obviously, right now, the Browns have the first pick in this day 2. Will they take it on Shedeur? They obviously have a big hole at quarterback. I think they're leaning more towards not taking Shedeur Sanders, but it's still definitely an option. Raiders, Saints, Jets, I think, are still all on the board. Thoughts on the possibility for the Browns with the first pick in the second, take TreVeyon Henderson. Take Shedeur with the first and then TreVeyon Henderson. Yeah, I mean, I would really like TreVeyon Henderson for the Browns, I think. Obviously, running back is a hole right now. Jerome Ford is the main running back. Nick Chubb still unsigned. They do need a RB1 going into the future. TreVeyon Henderson, I think, makes a lot of sense. And, if they do want to take a swing at Shedeur, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. You're already in the second round. It's not like you're taking him at the second overall pick. This is number 33. The only thing, too, I think, is could the Browns potentially trade out of that spot if they get a ransom? If somebody really wants Shedeur to try to trade up there, could they trade out of 33? I think that's a very strong possibility, actually. I think Andrew Berry could keep adding. I wouldn't hate the Browns adding Shedeur Sanders and then going and adding Travion Henderson. I don't know. I think, obviously, receiver is a big need. I would probably prefer to take a receiver first over Travion Henderson, just because I think the depth of this running back class is much greater than the depth at wide receiver. I think there's probably about 10 guys in the running back class that are potential starting running backs for NFL teams. So that's why I think you could probably go wide receiver or O-line first with one of those two picks, and then maybe go get a running back. But Shedeur is there. If they do want to take him, I really think, though, the Travis Hunter trade kind of showed that the Browns are really looking to that 2026 quarterback class when they will now have 2 first-round picks. They could move a little more around the board at that point, trade up if they really like a guy. So that's why I kind of think they're going to pass on Shedeur. But there's a lot of teams in the top 10. Yeah, like a Luther Burden, I think, makes a lot of sense. I'm really high on Luther Burden personally. I think the Browns definitely do need to add to the wide receiver room at some point, definitely over the weekend. I would prefer to see them add a wide receiver today on day 2 compared to tomorrow. But yeah, I think something more similar to if you go a Luther Burden and then take a running back, maybe a Caleb Johnson, Dylan Sampson, Cam Scatterbo, potentially. I wouldn't mind Cam Scatterbo being a Cleveland Brown. And then you maybe look next year to Arch Manning, Cade Klubnik, Drew Aller, Garrett Nussmeier, Lenoris Sellers. There's a ton of quarterbacks next year that I think the Browns probably are more likely to look at than Shedeur. But Shedeur's going to have suitors. I think the Raiders at 37 could definitely look at him here. The Saints are at 40, and the Jets are at 42 too. So I think those are all teams that in the second round, they're much more comfortable with taking a Shedeur Sanders, and they all still have holes in that quarterback room. Obviously, the Raiders, they got Geno, but it really sounds like Tom Brady's a big fan of him. Some of their front office is. Yes, I would love to see Donovan Peoples-Jones back in Cleveland too. That would be a lot of fun. I'm a big DPJ fan, but I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to see kind of where these guys end up, what happens here. But we'll see. But we're going to take another short break on the GSMC College Football Podcast. When we come back, guess what? It's more draft talk. We're going to talk about some of the guys that are still remaining, some of the top guys available, what they bring to the table as prospects. But we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back on the GSMC College Football Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC College Football Podcast. We just talked about Shedeur falling, but we're going to switch gears, talk a little bit about some of the guys that are still available on day 2. I think one of the best guys right here, Will Johnson. I'm pretty surprised he fell to the second round, actually. This was a guy that was getting top 5, top 10 hype at one point. Did have an injury this season, so I think that kind of set him back. But this is a guy that's a really long corner, 6'2", 195, good frame, able to match up with bigger wide receivers as well. It's a guy that's a really strong man coverage corner, excels at reading the quarterback, looking at his eyes, breaking off on routes, breaking up passes just from of that. anticipation, reading the quarterback's eyes. This is a guy that he can split high-low route combinations really well, plays the ball, not the man. In zone looks, he's going to have to work on his zone coverage, but he's strong enough to reroute, stay on top of receivers in press coverage. I think this is a guy that's a really good man corner, first and foremost, and also just a playmaker at the cornerback position. Had 9 career interceptions, but of those 9, also returned 4 pick sixes. So that's a guy that can make plays when the ball's in his hand. Obviously, not going to get the ball in your hands a lot as a cornerback, but it's a good skill set to have, I think. A big thing, I think a reason why he slipped was he did miss 7 games this year, had a turf toe injury, then missed his pro day as well with a nagging hamstring injury, so didn't test in the process. But this is a guy that I think definitely is a first-round talent. And I think he's going to go pretty early on today. I think there's too many teams that have needs at cornerback that are going to take a look at him. But that's going to be a guy that I think is going to be a really solid pick up for whoever does take him today. Will Johnson, I think, has cornerback 1 potential, and anytime you can find that in the second round in day 2, that's always a really big bonus. Mike Green also fell. He was getting a lot of hype to Atlanta throughout the process at the number 15 overall pick. They decided to go with Jalen Walker from Georgia, who ended up falling a little bit, which I really liked for the Falcons. But Mike Green, I think probably part of the reason he fell is just coming from Marshall. You're playing in a conference that's obviously not a Power 4 conference. The level of competition, there's a little more question marks. But this is a guy that led the FBS in sacks last season, had 17 sacks, really explosive pass rusher, a guy that can transition from speed to power rushing really well, active hands, and he's able to change direction, just a fast, smooth, quick off the edge. He's able to win inside. He can kind of weave in and out, able to dip, flatten kind of at the top of his rush. And this is a guy that chases down the ball with excellent effort, gets under blockers, able to kind of shoot through gaps and use his hands while defending the run as well. So I think that's also one of his more underrated aspects, is the ability to defend against the run as well as the pass. Also a guy that was a former linebacker, so he can get dropped into depth, into coverage, if you're giving some different looks, some different packages on defense. This is a guy that can do that as well, which you always like to see out of your DNs. If you're dropping back in zone, don't want to be exposed. Mike Green is able to do that just from being a former linebacker and having made that transition already. He's got that skill set, and this is a guy that I think can be a really big help on the edge for whoever takes him. Just a solid prospect overall. I think a big part of why he dropped was probably just from that level of competition coming from Marshall, but I think a guy that can definitely help an NFL pass rush out. Another guy that was getting a lot of first-round buzz was Nick Emmanwori, South Carolina. This kid is a freak athlete, just absolute physical specimen, 6'3", about 220, but he's one of only 4 players who's above 6'3" to have topped 40 inches in his vertical jump and ran a sub 4.4 40-yard dash since 2003. So 1 of 4 guys in 22 years, not bad. That's pretty impressive, I'd say, especially when you're looking at just the level of athletes across the NFL, the level of athletes that come in to that league, test at the combine, and this kid is one of 4 dudes to have ran as fast as he did and has jumped as high as he did. So anytime you have that kind of athletic ability, you're always going to have eyes on you. But this is a guy that, he's a pretty good football player too. You know, that's always a good thing to have, I would say. But this is a guy that closes quickly, breaks on the ball well, guy that blows up screens, matches up well with tight ends. Where do you think Xavier Watts will land? I don't know. I'm really curious on to see where Xavier Watts is actually going to end up. I really like him as a player. I was a little surprised that he hasn't been rated as highly in this kind of pre-draft process, just because the kid is an absolute ball hawk. I don't know the number of interceptions he's had off the top of his head, but has had multiple every single season. Guy that was the leader of a Notre Dame defense that was an elite unit, and a big-time starter, producer at a really high level. I don't know where he ends up. I think he's probably maybe a late second round or early third. I could see him slide a little bit. Safety depth isn't huge in this class, though, so that is one thing to look at. But he's probably the third or fourth safety down the board right now, I'd think. Nick Amawari is obviously still there. Andrew Mabuka from Texas is still there as well. He's a little higher regarded right now as a prospect, but I think Xavier Watts is going to be a really good player in the NFL. That's a guy that I watched throughout college and saw him progress just as a player. Ball hawk, that's the first thing that comes to my mind for Xavier Watts. I think he's going to be a good player. I don't know, though. I think he's probably a round 3 guy at this point. We're going to just have to see, I think, how the safeties kind of play out. That's going to be the big thing to look at here, is just kind of what happens with them. Travion Henderson is a guy that's still on the board, too. I think he's one of my top overall prospects. This guy had an up-and-down career at Ohio State. I watched him live his freshman season. Kid, that was his best year, too. Had 1,250 rushing yards that year, 15 touchdowns. Also had 27 catches for 300 receiving yards that year. And then kind of struggled after that, back-to-back seasons of injuries a little bit. And then comes back, gets a really big backfield partner last year. And, yeah, not a bad running back in his own right, Quinshon Judkins. So, but those two paired together, Travion comes back, has a bounce-back season last year. And really, I think he was one of the most important guys to Ohio State's title run last season. I think he doesn't get a lot of the credit that he probably deserves, just in terms of his importance to their national championship run. Travion Henderson is a guy that really did a lot for the Buckeyes, and this is a guy that's a home run hitter out of the backfield. If he has a little space, he can take it to the house at pretty much any point in time. At a minimum, Travion Henderson is going to be a really great kind of speed third down threat as of coming out of the backfield, able to pass block really well. That's one of the more underrated aspects of his skill set. And also just obviously the pass catching ability out of the backfield is something that teams are looking for more and more these days, just as the league is such a pass-driven league. This is a guy that can fill that role really well. And I think he's a guy that also can handle a bigger workload if he's healthy, fully healthy. That's the big thing with Travion Henderson. Talent has never been a question mark. Traits have never been a question mark. Just can he stay on the field? That's going to be the big thing. But if he's fully healthy, if he kind of gets his body a little more right, a little stronger, I think this is a guy that can be a bell cow running back for a team, for a franchise. So I just talked a little bit about Shedeur not getting drafted. I think there's a couple teams, though, that can definitely look at him. Browns are obviously going to be up there. Raiders could definitely be up there. I think Raiders are a team that could actually really take a chance on him, just because obviously Tom Brady, part owner now, John Spytek coming in. It sounds like they really like him. But then the Saints are also at 40. I think the Saints are much more comfortable kind of taking a chance on Shedeur in the second round. And then the Jets are at 42 as well. Obviously, they did sign Justin Fields, but long-term, he only signed a short-term deal. Mike Green, I'm not sure, honestly. I was debating I wonder if Cleveland's going to take an edge with one of those first 2 or 4 picks. I guess they have 2 of the top 4 or 5. But I was wondering if Cleveland might take him. Just they pair him up with Myles Garrett. They need another defensive end anyways. Ogbo Okonkwo is getting up there. They were looking to trade him anyways. So I don't know, though. Yeah, I had Mike Green going to the Falcons at 15. I'm really surprised that he's still here on the board. Yeah, that's a tough one, is because there's not a ton of obvious landing spots for him right now. Where he's going to end up, I think, is going to be really interesting to see. Another guy that I really like is Luther Burden, wide receiver, Missouri. I think he's my number 2 wide receiver prospect in this year's class. I guess true wide receiver prospect. Travis Hunter's kind of his own thing, but that's a guy that I think can help a team right away. I'll be curious to see kind of where he ends up as well. But we're going to take our last break of the show right now, and when we come back, we're going to do a little mini mock draft. I had picks 33 through 40 is what I wrote down already. So we're going to go through that, kind of talk about who I think could end up where. But we are going to be back shortly on the GSMC College Football Podcast. Welcome back to the GSMC College Football Podcast. And obviously, guess what? We're going to talk a little more draft stuff. But I want to do a little kind of mini mock draft of what I think could maybe happen. Probably will be dead wrong. But I will say, I got 5 to 10 picks right yesterday, so I was pretty happy with myself there. But it's a crapshoot. It's a guessing game. You never know what's going to happen. 33. This is a really interesting spot for Cleveland. I don't think Cleveland stays here, honestly. I think they're probably going to trade out realistically, or at a very minimum, they're going to at least field a ton of phone calls for this pick. I could really see a team trying to trade up to either maybe take Shedeur Sanders or take one of these guys that fell out of the first round, like a Will Johnson or a Mike Green. We'll see, though. It's going to be interesting. I think if they do stay, there's a couple of different options. So I had one, though, that's a little off track of the common thinking right now. I think they could go Nick Emmanwori out of South Carolina in one of those 2 picks. But here's why. I think his talent, the way he can move across the board, just gives the Browns a versatile chess piece. Jim Schwartz can move him around, put him in different formations, probably even bring him down as a sub-package linebacker at some point just because of size. Pairs with Grant Delpit on that back end to give them really much-needed juice. That other safety spot has really been lacking for the Browns past couple years. Juan Thornhill was a big disappointment. Just couldn't really stay on the field. And this is a guy that you pair him up with Grant Delpit. You have 2 safeties that can do a whole lot around the field and 2 guys that can fly. I think it'd be a lot of fun. And then also, if you have Greg Newsome has kind of been in trade rumors, got a $13 million cap hit. And I think if the Browns do move on from him, Nick Emmanwori is a guy that can also cover the slot at certain times. So I think just the versatility there, it gives the Browns defense a piece that they really could use. Obviously, they do have other needs. There's a ton of needs on the Browns roster, but I don't know. I think that's a pick that I wouldn't be surprised if secondary is actually an option for the Browns in the early rounds. I don't know. We'll see. They got a couple of different needs. Texans at 34, they're going to be an interesting choice. It's going to be their first selection of the draft. Really need offensive line help right now. I have them going Jonah Savianea out of Arizona. This is a guy that he lined up at right tackle, left tackle, and right guard during college. Primarily played tackle and can provide depth there in the NFL. I think this is a guy that probably moves on the inside when he gets to the league. But a pretty quick lineman at the combine, tied for the second fastest 10-yard split of offensive linemen. Also ran a sub-5 40-yard dash. Those are really impressive numbers for an offensive lineman, especially when you consider that he is 330 pounds. That's a lot of quickness and athleticism out of a guy that's that frame. And then I think just moving him inside, played 4 games at guard in 2023, and he's a better pass blocker on the inside than he is out at tackle. Houston really needs O-line help. Obviously traded him Laramie Tunsil, added Cam Robinson, made a couple other moves, but they still, at the minimum, can use depth on that offensive line. Jonas Savannah, that's a guy that can definitely add to the depth, probably start at one of the guard positions, hopefully fortify that for the Texans. They need to protect C.J. Stroud better. I'd be pretty surprised if this wasn't a line pick or on either side of the line. I think offensive line is much more of a pressing need for Houston right now, but they draft a guy that can play guard and tackle, gives them some help if they need to move guys across the line. I think it makes a lot of sense for them. Tennessee, it's going to be an interesting. We'll see. I have Luther Burden right now, but honestly, the more I think about it, I think this could be a spot for Mike Green to end up at. Titans could use some edge help too, but I think wide receiver, that's a really pressing need for them right now. They really only have getting up there and injury-riddled Calvin Ridley. That's their top wide receiver right now. Treylon Burks, kind of a bust. They need playmakers on this offense. You give them a guy like Luther Burden at 35 who can do a whole lot. I think he's a lot more talented than people are giving credit for. This was a guy that was a top 15 pick going into this season. And you give them Luther Burden, you let them slot him in at the number 2 wide receiver right away, and that's a really solid option for new quarterback Cam Ward. I think pairing those two together as rookies, it would make a lot of sense. They need to go skill position here, I think. But, we'll see what Tennessee does. I would not be surprised, though, if a wide receiver is the pick there, or a tight end, some kind of playmaker, I think. Then the Browns are back on the board at 36. This is where I do have them taking a tackle. I have Arante Airsry from Minnesota, big tackle, 6'6", 330. But the Browns really need tackle depth. They need O-line depth in general, but really need tackle depth right now. Jack Conklin, they did rework his deal. He's back another year, but has kind of been injured the past few seasons on and off. Right now, DeJuan Jones is penciled in as the starter at left tackle. He's also recovering from injury right now and hasn't really played left tackle. Has primarily played more right tackle. So you give them a guy that can slot in at left tackle right away, or, he bring them along slowly. You have him sit behind Conklin for a year and then take over there. This is a kid, he didn't start playing football until his junior year of high school, but played 38 games at left tackle. The Browns really need left tackle right now. It's an athletic lineman too. 10-yard split was outstanding. Ran it in 1.75 seconds. And a guy that explodes off the ball on the snap, and you can see it just show up on tape. This is a guy that he's able to pass edge defenders off pretty easily, and he can work up to the linebackers when blocking, getting upfield. I think it's a fit that makes a lot of sense for Cleveland. 37, here's where I have Shedeur Sanders falling. I think the Raiders stop his slide. Obviously, they did bring in Geno Smith, did give him a 3-year contract, but you never know. Hey, Atlanta brought in Kirk Cousins and then drafted Michael Penix at number 9 overall last season, so you can never know what can happen. I think, though, the Raiders have really loved Shedeur Sanders as a prospect. If they're able to get him in round 2, that gives them a quarterback of the future. He can sit behind Geno Smith for at least 2025 and then potentially step into the starting role in 2026. I think it makes a ton of sense for the Raiders to at least take a swing there, and hopefully he does pan out as a franchise quarterback for them. I think, though, that's a move that makes a lot of sense. The Patriots, 38, the Bears, 39. I have them both taking running backs right now. Obviously, which running back it's going to be, I don't know. But Patriots right now, actually, I have them taking Quinshon Judkins over Travion Henderson. But there's a reason I think the power-based running game of Quinshon Judkins fits more with what Mike Vrabel is going to try to build there in New England. His ability to just run through people, to force contact, and this is a guy that can do a whole lot. I think Quinshon actually is probably a better fit for New England, but then the Bears say, thank you, we're going to draft Mr. Henderson at 39. Chicago can pair Travion Henderson with DeAndre Swift, give Ben Johnson kind of a new iteration of, his little thunder and lightning backfield of David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs in Detroit. You give them a dynamic threat out of the backfield in Travion Henderson, a guy that can do a whole lot, especially in terms of the passing game. Just really builds that offense around Caleb Williams and gives them another dynamic ball carrier. I think it's a move that makes a lot of sense. I definitely think Chicago probably takes running back at 39. And then Saints at 40. Here's where I think Will Johnson's slide is going to end. I think Saints take a cornerback, even if Will Johnson's not on the board. Saints could definitely end up grabbing him. They're in a really good position where they can kind of ease Will Johnson into the starting lineup. They still have Kool-Aid McKinstry, Alontae Taylor, and Isaac Yiadom. So they can come in, be the fourth corner right away, and then kind of ease him into a role where he's building up. But this is a guy that can potentially take over as the number 1 cornerback and be the number 1 cornerback in New Orleans for a long time. I think the Saints would be ecstatic here if Will Johnson was still available to them. They get a potential top 15 talent in this draft at the number 40 overall position, at a position that they need. I think it's a move that makes a lot of sense. And then also when you pair that with the Panthers drafted Ted McMillan, the Bucks drafted Emeka Egbuka. So your two of your division rivals drafted wide receivers, adding to that room. You always want to try to combat your division rivals. So what do? You draft a cornerback. I think that could potentially make a lot of sense there for the New Orleans Saints. But we're going to have to see. That's part of the fun of draft weekend, is you never know what can happen. You never know who can be picked. You never know who's going to fall. We're just going to have to wait and find out. It's going to be a lot of fun, though, today. But with that, we are going to end our show for today. Thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC College Football Podcast. Please remember to subscribe, like, follow, share, whatever your heart desires. And if you want, you can also go to Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter to get more sports content, more sports updates, all of that fun stuff. But thank you so much and have a great day.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to